Well, no, I was just going to thank everyone for, just sort of sharing about why this is something that you're interested in doing. Um, and, although there are a lot of similarities and some differences in what I heard people say, I think that you'll get what you're looking for out of the Network Weaver Learning Lab. I have to say, in thinking about how we wanted to share what the Network Weaver Learning Lab is about, it was very timely that Sarah sent me a link to an article that was in the New York Times on Monday. It's a piece written by David Brooks. And I'm looking over here at some notes to make sure I get the name right. The name of the article was called A Nation of Weavers. And so David Brooks is part of a project that's called the Weave Project. And it's a project that's about trying to help America sort of reweave its social fabric. I don't think it's surprising to anyone that America is suffering from anxiety, some depression, and this is much of it predating even the 2016 election. And so there are these national efforts to really rebuild community. But there are a couple of points that he makes in the article that I think are a nice sort of jumping off point in thinking about the Network Weaver Learning Lab. So David Brooks talks about how in his work on this project, he's been going around the country and he has been meeting these people and he calls them weavers because he literally talks about them weaving the social fabric of the communities that they're in. And these are people who are, I love this term, he calls them relationists. And that the work that they do is really around building connections between people. And so 2 points that he makes in the article that I think are very specific to the Network Weaver Learning Lab. One thing that he says is that all of the people that he met who were these outstanding weavers were people who were whole. So these are people who are grounded and centered and whole in their being. The other point that he makes in the article is that he talks about scale in the article, and a quote from the article is that culture changes when a small group of people find a better way to live and other people begin to copy them. So it's about sort of starting small and scaling up to sort of this massive culture change. And so it's kind of a riff on this idea of transforming yourself to transform the world. So thinking of those two things, sort of this idea of being whole people, so sort of transforming personally, and then as we transform personally and become whole, that scales up to systemic and cultural and sort of big picture change. That's kind of what the Network Weaver Learning Lab is grounded in. And so what I'm going to do now is just pull up a quick slide that shows sort of some of the core elements of the Learning Lab. And you'll have a chance to ask all sorts of questions here in just a moment. Does everyone see the slides? Yes. No. Yes.
No.
No. Okay. Hold on. No. Okay. Let me come back. Okay. To share. There we are. Now you should see the slides.
Yeah, it takes a second, but it's coming. There you go.
Here we go.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. And so what you have here is the framework for the Network Weaver Learning Lab. And this idea of, that when a few people start to make changes, that other people start to copy them, and then it grows and grows and it gets bigger, and eventually you see culture shifts. We call that idea emergent strategy. Okay, and so the whole Network Weaver Learner Lab is sort of based on this idea that the small things, the small changes that we make as individuals affect the way that we are in relationship with the people closest to us, and that those people begin to change, and so on and so on and so on. And that ultimately you get sort of, you see sort of large scale change. And so we call that emergent strategy. And so that's the scale piece. But that wholeness, that personal transformation piece, in our work, we believe that there are sort of three core components to that personal wholeness, that personal transformation work. And let me say, we are not experts on all of this. So, you know, we're all on learning journeys. And so it's a bit of, that's why we're calling it a learning lab. This is a bit of an experiment. But the three core pieces that we're naming are understanding power, transformative relationships, and then the importance of practicing transformation. Looking at those themes through the lens of myself, so that's the me, the person, the people closest to us, our family, and our communities and our organizations. And so that's sort of the framework for the Learning Lab. When we talk about understanding power, we're going to be talking about dominant culture. We're going to be talking about, and we all have our own baggage around power usually. You know, people, I'm sure everyone in the Learning Lab has different ideas about power. So unpacking our own baggage about power. We want to talk about this idea of power over, the idea of domination versus power with, the idea of shared power. And then talking about personal power, our own agency in the world, and sort of what are our beliefs around our own agency to make change. And so Jane, I think you were going to talk a little bit about transformative relationships.
Right. And so I think going back to the power piece, the first bullet point around dominant culture is a really important one. And that's the piece that I think, you know, directly connects to issues of race and racism. Really being clear and acknowledging the effects of white dominant culture in terms of the ways in which we've sort of all been dehumanized by this overemphasis on individualism, self-interest, competition, ego-driven, that really our work is about challenging those dominant cultural notions in order to imagine another way of being with ourselves and with each other. And so it's really about trying to adopt a different set of values that are counter to this whole idea of individual self-interest, but more around cooperation, interdependence, and really taking the time to build trust in relationships. And so the whole notion of relationships is just foundational to this work. And so we're really going to try to unpack what we mean by transformative relationships. And a lot of this we've sort of borrowed from these amazing people we were able to meet, Aaron Goggins and Rebecca Mintz, who run these Liberation Logic workshops in DC. Aaron is with Black Lives Matter and Rebecca's with Surge in DC. And the way they describe transformative relationships is really acknowledging that in this dominant culture we find ourselves in, no matter where we find ourselves on the socioeconomic spectrum, all of us are experiencing some degree of dehumanization. So for people struggling on the margins, they're dehumanized into inferiority. For people with positions of power, they're dehumanized into superiority, right? And so the whole idea of learning to be in transformative relationship means giving ourselves space to really heal from this dehumanization, to give our space to both heal and then transform into healthier, stronger, freer versions of ourselves so that we can work more effectively together across our divisions for equity, justice, and liberation for everybody. And so that's the piece around transformative relationships that we're really trying to explore in this lab. And so it really goes sort of beyond transactional relationships. It's sort of what we're used to, sort of this one-way giving, or like sort of the charity model. And at Impact, we sort of pushed ourselves to move beyond that to this idea of reciprocal mutual relationships, meaning that everybody has value and we're all equal. And transformative relationships goes even deeper than that. So those are the sorts of things that we're going to be looking at for this particular module.
And so finally, the importance of practice. You know, so a lot of this can seem very theoretical, but how do you actually practice personal transformation? And so one piece that we want to talk about is radical self-care. Helping ourselves to think about self-care not as sort of this indulgent luxury, but rather thinking of taking care of ourselves, particularly as we are doing the hard work of being weavers in the world, really thinking about taking care of ourselves as essential to social change and almost a political act when we stay strong and centered. And so we are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about self-organized actions. These are actions that are happening in communities that are happening organically rather than, you know, actions that are sort of being directed from the outside. These are actions that people can take in the community to do things that they care about, centered on people's gifts, their interests, but without outside direction. It's really tapping into people's natural passions and their natural gifts and talents, which is not always the way that things happen in communities. So we want to take a look at that. And Jane, I think you were going to talk a little bit about self-management in the workplace.
Right, and so sort of going from personal individual change to how we connect with others in our own community, we're going to also look at what does this transformation look like in our workplaces. And at Impact, we're really on a journey to figure out how to become a non-hierarchical, leaderful organization. Again, sort of in contrast to dominant culture ways of being, where organizations are structured very much as hierarchy, you know, with the person at the top who's got the most power. There's a lot of sort of control that happens by the person on top with those beneath in the hierarchy. And we're really trying to flip that. Again, sort of looking at this whole idea of wholeness, you know, each person being able to bring their whole self to work, each person being able to name their gifts and their skills and their passions, and to really be able to actualize that in the workplace. The idea being that when people are whole and doing what they're meant to do and what they love to do, you don't really need somebody above them telling them what to do. And so we're sort of on this journey of really trying to live out within our own organizational workplace, just a non-hierarchical way of being and doing the work collectively. So we're going to sort of explore that a little bit more in the learning lab. So again, the importance of practice at the individual level. How do we get to a place of wholeness and healing within ourselves in this sort of search to rehumanize ourselves? How do we practice this in community with our neighbors? How do we practice it with our coworkers in the workplace? And then hopefully at the end of the lab, after having explored all these different levels of change, we're hoping that people can come out with sort of a personal transformation plan. So that's, yeah.
And so I'm wondering, do people have any reaction, any questions, any response to the framework as we've talked about it?
This is Sarah. I have a question. And that is, when you talk about a personal development plan, what would that look like? Just to give me some idea of how that might take shape as a result of, as you move through these, you know, the training and the modules. Thank you.
That's a great question. I'm not sure I have an immediate answer to that. Sarah, in all honesty, we're sort of creating this as we go. So I think that's, unless, I mean, Lonita, Carolyn, Yesenia, feel free to jump in.
I think what I would say, yes, we are you know, it is a lab, so we're experimenting, but I think as I've done my own personal transformation plans, I think because I have gone through sort of, you know, all of these topics for myself, I think I have found areas that where I struggle. You know, for me, power and personal power is a little bit of a struggle for me. And so taking some of the things that I've learned about practice, and these are things that you'll learn in the Learning Lab, I have worked on creating a personal transformation plan that is sort of focused on getting sort of healthier around my relationship with personal power. And so I can imagine that as people are going through the modules, there may be certain topics or concepts that people find a little bit more challenging than others. And so at the end, when we do talk about practice, sort of layering practice over those things that we find challenging and want to work on as we transform, if that's helpful.
I'll also like to just add in, one of our roles as facilitators, and I'm just one of your facilitators, is we're going to provide you guys with guidance, but it's not going to be prescriptive. So the personal transformation plan is really the exploration of what you want it to be. I always say, you know, something that's within your sphere of influence, something that you're willing to hold yourself accountable for. And like what Lenita said, it can be, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you struggle with, but it can exist within these areas. It could be around power, it could be around transformative relationships, it could be around practice. It could also be, you know, more broad, which is just, okay, I'm going to focus on me, I'm going to focus on my neighbors, I'm going to focus on my organization or community. So as a personal example, I've done a lot of work even since last year when I joined the Network Weavers Learning Lab. My journey has been around self-care and really knowing how to put up personal boundaries and really taking care of my health physically and mentally. So that's just another example.
Because I think as you all go through the program, it's really, and I'll be honest, this is going to push people to really go deep and, you know, into some uncomfortable terrain. So I think as you go through it, things will come up where you feel a lot of resistance, pain, and that I think that your personal transformation process will evolve as you go through this. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense.
Okay.
I'm going to take us through the schedule really quickly, and that way we can take these slides down and see each other fully again and maybe get into some more questions. So just to take folks through the calendar, it's kind of a 6-month program spread over 8 months is the way we like to say it. There's an orientation that starts on Wednesday, April 10th. There's a retreat that's on, it's a half-day Friday, no, well, not quite half-day, a quarter-day Friday and a full-day Saturday on April 26th and April 27th. There is the REI workshop, which is a full 2-day workshop, and it's included in this, in the Learning Lab. That REI workshop is put on by a group out of North Carolina called the Racial Equity Institute. And it's a 2-day sort of intensive around historical and structural racism in the U.S. And it's just really good background knowledge for jumping into the Learning Lab. Then we have our first lab, which focuses on emergent strategy and radical self-care. That's going to be on Saturday, June 15th. That's all day. Over the summer through July and August, people will be doing sort of self-directed self-care practice. So no actual meetings, but you will have some work that you're doing over the summer. We resume with labs in September. There's an all-day lab on September 21st, and that lab is on power. It's from 9 to 5. We have our third lab on Saturday, October, I don't see the, hold on, let me move this down here. Saturday, October 19th, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And that one is on transformative relationships. And then our final lab, which is on Saturday, November 16th from 9 to 5, is on practicing transformation. And so I've had a couple of people ask me about, is it okay to miss some labs? You know, that's, you know, as Jane said, it's pretty intense and it's time consuming. What we're asking is that people do attend the retreat and the REI workshop and not miss more than one of the labs. So that's where we are on attendance. So other questions about the framework, about the dates, about attendance. All of the sessions are going to be at the White Oak Community Center, which is right off Route 29, pretty centrally located. It's a new community center, so a great space, easy parking. So I'm going to stop talking and see if there are any questions about anything that's been said.
Lenita, it's Joanna. One question is there going to be homework, like other than over the summer? Or how much, like what do you envision that looking like?
There's probably definitely some journaling work that you'll need to do. I don't think that there would be anything that is, let me just say, there was a pilot Network Weaver Learning Lab last year. And so if we follow a similar script to the one we had last year, most of the homework is journaling work. Yesenia, do you see anything beyond sort of journaling work?
No. Maybe you'll have like optional things to follow up on in terms of maybe like an article or something, but we understand that it's already a big time commitment, so we're not gonna overwhelm you guys too much.
I just have one other question. How many people are you hoping to have participate? Like what does an ideal
20.
number look like?
We're looking to have 20. So other questions?
So how many people do you have so far? Is it the 10 of us, or I guess the 6 of us?
No, actually we have 12
That
Okay.
have applied so far.
that have applied so far.
Right. And it's a diverse mix of people.
Excellent.
So there are some people who applied without, you know, participating in this webinar.
Mm-hmm.
I would say though, if you know, particularly, it's a diverse group, but we could use some more men, I'll be honest with you.
That's what I was just going to ask, because I was in a diversity inclusion discussion program that was like 8 months at Justice Department, and that was the component we were missing, was white men. It was kind of, I don't know if it's self-selecting, but I can try to reach out in that direction if that's part of where the work is.
I think that would be great if you know someone who you think would be interested in this and a good candidate for it. The 2 men that we have are both Black, so we do not have any white males. So other questions, comments?
Carolyn, is there anything that you wanted to add? I
think you've got, pardon?
I don't put you on the spot, but just if there are things that, there's anything more that you want to add.
I think you've covered a lot. You've covered all of it. The only thing I would add is related to Joanna's question. And regarding homework, I participated last year. And even though I worked at Impact last year, I still participated. And it really really helped me frame certain things that were happening in our community and what was happening with me. The homework, there may be extra work you want to do based on what you learn about yourself or your community. That's not required, but it may be helpful. As I participated, I did do some reading and studying and looked at other resources as tools to help me with the self-care and power. We didn't have really a module around power, but when we talked about power, I looked at other resources. One of the great things was that our group, and I'm sure this group, as I'm looking at everyone who's on this, really formed great relationships. And it was helpful to have someone that was going through the same process to bounce ideas off of, or to ask questions like, is this just me, or did I take this the wrong way, or things like that. Because it is a very deep workshop, a lab. It's not, we expect some uncomfortable moments, and there certainly were last year. Our facilitators were and are great, and they were able to manage those tensions and work us through them and understand how it was related to what we were actually talking about. I think that's the only thing I would add. Oh, and dress comfortably.
If I could just add a couple more points, because I know a lot of these concepts are new and probably a little bit hard to like wrap your brains around. But if I could just offer another angle as to why Impact is offering this and doing it and feels this is so important. I mean, all of us on this call are so committed to issues of racial equity and racial justice. But too often, what we experience even in our own movement spaces of activists coming together to work for policy changes, to work for systems changes, that we often in our own movement spaces end up replicating the same sort of dominant culture, ego-driven, power, struggle behavior. And that to me means that we're really not doing the deep, true work of justice and equity and liberation. So if we can't figure out in our own movement spaces how to show up in a different way, how to show up with each other in ways that really honor the full dignity and humanity of each of us, I just feel like we're missing the mark. And so I would just ask and invite you, even though these concepts may seem a little bit theoretical or unclear or different or new, to just maybe, be willing to jump in with us to continue to really sort of grapple with some of these really, really deep questions that I think are essential for our ability to really figure out how to solve some of these intractable problems. So it's really about just learning to be in a different way with ourselves and with each other. And there's just a lot of trauma that each of us carries. And we want to create space to acknowledge that and just acknowledge that there's a lot of just healing that needs to happen individually and collectively. And too often we just skip over that healing part and want to jump into action. And I've just been, and I've been around too long in different movement spaces at the national level, at the local level, until we take time to heal and really focus on building those deep relationships with one another across lines of difference. Yeah, it just feels like we're running and not really making any progress. So.
And I'd like to just offer a concrete example to what Jane is speaking to. So I've been doing, I guess, racial equity work since college, like about 10 years now, professionally for about 6. I work for Montgomery County Public Schools in an office dedicated towards closing our opportunity gap. So I work in the Equity Initiatives unit. And to Jane's point, we have the best of intention. We all bring our expertise and our own lenses, but yet the way that the organization, the school system is structured doesn't always allow for the type of conversations that we need to really make transformative change. It really sometimes just feels like we keep doing strategies, we keep doing things over and over, we keep kind of just trying to put a Band-Aid on things instead of really examining the root cause. And even for myself doing this work, going through the network weavers made me realize that, you know, even as a woman of color, even as somebody who does this work, I need to put more emphasis on my own personal transformation and my relationships with others, as a way to like advance equity and justice. And it's a lot harder. What I've learned is it's harder, it's easier said than done, sorry. And so this process really is gonna challenge you to look at the space that you're in and see if you can approach it in a different way, because we can't make change if we keep doing the same things that we've always done. So this is really just a new way of exploring just how can we do this work differently.
I'm also going to add, in relation to that, that's very true and very, it's a point that came up and was very relevant to the lab. I would add to be kind to yourself in this process, kind and compassionate to yourself, because there are lots of things that we have been doing in our culture and personally because of the culture that we live in. We've all been socialized in certain ways that you may not expect to come up, or that you may not like, or that that is a challenge. And so at the beginning of last Network Weaver Learning Lab, somebody mentioned to be kind to myself and to be compassionate, and I'm glad she did. And be patient.
Well, and I have to say, I just appreciate how people are sharing so honestly and openly, and that's the kind of sharing that happens in the Learning Lab. The day-and-a-half retreat is completely focused on relationship building and helping people to feel connected enough to create brave spaces where people can really open up and talk honestly about things that can be difficult to talk about. So we are very, very, very excited about the Learning Lab. I know that some of the folks who are on the call have already registered for the Learning Lab, and others are still thinking about it. And so we hope that this time tonight sort of helps to tip you into the yes, I want to do it column. Are there any other questions? Anything, Jane, Yesenia, Carolyn, anything else that you want to add? I will mention that we are providing English, Spanish interpretation. We want this to be a truly inclusive and diverse space. And so we do have at least one person who's going to be taking advantage of that interpretation. We had maybe 3 participants in the last Learning Lab who were Spanish speakers, and it was just a really rich environment to have that perspective. People who lived in other countries and are newer to this community, and so it is really a very rich, diverse environment. So other questions? Any other comments, questions?
Just one thing I'd like to add is the Learning Lab is not a training. It's going to just feel really different. There's a combination of individual reflection, partnered work, group work, whole group discussions. Some is learning. There's some times where we're going to do like formal learning. There's times where we're going to do more so exploration through different activities. dialogues. So it's not that you're going to come from 9 to 5 and just like sit in a training all day. It's the complete opposite.
And so the Learning Lab, Yesenia and Dina Cooney are going to be sort of facilitators throughout, kind of holding the space the entire time. There may be moments when we have some guests who join us, but know that you will be in very capable and nurturing, loving hands throughout the entire Learning Lab. So for those of you who are still thinking about registering, the registration is online, so I will send out the link to the registration again. The deadline for registration is March 29th. I believe someone asked me, and I can't remember who it was, someone was asking me about the REI workshop, whether it was actually included in the Learning Lab, because if you go to that REI workshop, which is being brought to Montgomery County by Impact and Leadership Montgomery in partnership, if you try to register for that REI training right now, it's about $350 to do the training. But if you are coming in through the Learning Lab, it is included in the Learning Lab. So there's also a value piece to the Learning Lab. We do ask for a donation, a $100 donation. So there's a sliding scale donation up to $100 for the Learning Lab. But we are not turning anyone away because of an inability to pay. So if you would look at it as a donation to Impact. Jane, do you have anything else you'd like to share? Any? Because I think we're getting to our time of wrapping up. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add.
No, I just encourage each of you. I know it was a lot to take in. If you think of questions after this webinar, feel free to reach out to any one of us, Carolyn, Lenita, Yesenia, myself. Send us an email. We can schedule a call. Just call us. And so we're happy to kind of to go more in depth with you one-on-one if you feel like you need that. So.
Yes, and we will post this video to Impact's YouTube channel. And so if you know people who might be interested in the Learning Lab, but you feel like they need a little bit more than just what's been written about it so far, you can direct people to this video. Hopefully we'll have it up early next week. So with that, if there are no more questions, I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Again, I will send out the link to the Learning Lab application, and also a link to that David Brooks article that I mentioned a little bit earlier in our conversation. And we really hope that all of you will decide to join us in the Learning Lab. So thank you so much for your time tonight. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Good night.